April 26, 2024, 3:47 p.m. Central Daylight Time, Lancaster County, Nebraska. The National Weather Service office in Valley had already issued a tornado watch for most of eastern Nebraska hours earlier. The atmosphere was volatile, warm, moist air streaming north from the Gulf, a dry line pressing east from the high plains, and a powerful jet stream overhead. By mid-afternoon, the watch had become a warning. At 3:47 p.m., a severe thunderstorm near the city of Lincoln produced a tornado. It touched down just northwest of the city limits, near the intersection of West Denton Road and Northwest 48th Street. First reports came in from trained spotters, a large wedge tornado, rain-wrapped, moving southeast at 35 miles per hour. The warning siren system in Lincoln activated within 2 minutes, but by then the tornado was already on the ground. What happened next was not a single event, but a sequence of failures, decisions, and coincidences that investigators would later piece together like shards of glass. The tornado was rated EF4 on the enhanced Fujita scale, with estimated winds of 175 miles per hour. It carved a path 22 miles long, from the rural outskirts of Lincoln into the heart of the city, crossing Interstate 80, tearing through residential neighborhoods, commercial districts, and a major university campus. The damage was catastrophic. Over 2,000 structures damaged or destroyed, 6 people killed, and more than 150 injured. But the number of fatalities could have been much higher. The timeline, as later reconstructed by meteorologists and emergency management officials, showed how close the margin of survival truly was. At 3:48 p.m., the tornado was on the ground and intensifying. The first damage was to farmsteads and rural homes northwest of Lincoln. A barn was flattened, a grain silo collapsed, power lines snapped. The storm moved quickly, crossing into the suburban fringe near Northwest 48th and West O Street. At 3:50 p.m., a spotter reported debris lofted to 10,000 feet, a classic signature of a violent tornado. The National Weather Service issued a tornado emergency at 3:51 p.m., a rare and urgent designation reserved for confirmed catastrophic tornadoes threatening populated areas. The message went out over NOAA weather radio, local television, and mobile phone alerts. But the siren system in Lincoln, which had activated at 3:49 p.m., was not designed to cover every interior room of every building. Many people in the path did not hear the sirens or did not take them seriously. At 3:53 p.m., the tornado crossed Interstate 80 near the 96th Street interchange. Vehicles were thrown off the road. One semi-trailer truck was lifted and deposited upside down in a ditch. The driver survived but suffered severe injuries. At 3:55 p.m., the tornado entered the city of Lincoln proper, moving through the Highland Park neighborhood. Homes that had been standing for 50 years were reduced to piles of lumber. Trees were debarked. Cars were wrapped around utility poles. The tornado was now at its maximum intensity, producing a swath of EF4 damage a quarter-mile wide. At 3:57 p.m., the tornado reached the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's East Campus. Several buildings sustained major structural damage. The veterinary medicine complex was partially unroofed. A research greenhouse was destroyed. Fortunately, many students and staff had taken shelter in basements and interior corridors after the university's emergency alert system activated at 3:52 p.m., but some did not. 2 graduate students in a lab on the 3rd floor of the Animal Sciences building did not receive the alert because they were working in a Faraday cage-style room that blocked cellular signals. They sheltered in a hallway, surviving with minor cuts and bruises. At 3:59 p.m., the tornado moved through the South Lincoln neighborhood where a commercial strip mall was hit. A grocery store took a direct hit. The roof collapsed. 23 people were inside, including employees and shoppers. 6 of them died. The rest were trapped under debris. Rescue efforts were hampered by downed power lines, gas leaks, and blocked roads. It took emergency crews 45 minutes to reach the most critically injured. At 4:02 p.m., the tornado began to weaken as it crossed the southeastern edge of the city. It lifted at 4:05 p.m. near the town of Bennet, about 5 miles southeast of Lincoln. The entire event, from touchdown to lift, lasted 18 minutes. In that time, the tornado had traveled 22 miles and caused an estimated $900 million in damage. But the real human cost was measured in the 6 lives lost: a 27-year-old mother and her 4-year-old daughter in the grocery store, a 62-year-old man in his home in Highland Park, 2 university students ages 19 and 21 who were driving home from class when their car was thrown into a drainage ditch, and an 80-year-old woman in a nursing home that lost part of its roof. How could this have happened? The question that investigators faced was not simply about the tornado itself, which was a natural phenomenon, but about the systems that were supposed to protect people. The answer was complicated. The National Weather Service had issued a tornado warning 21 minutes before the tornado touched down. That warning was based on radar signatures and spotter reports. Lead time was within the typical range for such events, about 15 to 25 minutes. The problem was not detection. The problem was communication and compliance. Lincoln's outdoor warning siren system consisted of 82 sirens across the city. They were activated automatically when a tornado warning was issued by the National Weather Service. But sirens are designed to be heard outdoors. In homes with windows closed, air conditioning running, or televisions on, they are often inaudible. Many people in the path reported not hearing the sirens at all. Others heard them but did not take shelter because they assumed it was a routine test or because they were not sure where to go. The mobile phone alert system, wireless emergency alerts, was activated at 3:51 p.m. but there were delays. Some carriers did not relay the alert to all devices in the affected area until nearly 3:55 p.m., by which time the tornado was already tearing through the city. The alert also did not include specific instructions. It simply said, "Take shelter now." Many recipients did not understand the urgency. The university's emergency alert system, which sent texts and emails, was activated at 3:52 p.m., but as the two graduate students discovered, not every location on campus had reliable cellular coverage. The system also relied on students and staff having their phones turned on and within reach. One student who was in the gym at the time of the tornado reported that he had left his phone in his locker. He survived by sheltering in a weight room, but he did not get the alert until 10 minutes after the tornado had passed. The human factor was also critical. In the grocery store where 6 people died, surveillance footage later showed that when the tornado warning was issued over the store's PA system, some customers continued shopping. Others looked out the windows. One employee, a teenager working the register, told her manager she was scared and asked if they should go to the back. The manager said it was probably just a thunderstorm. The tornado struck less than 2 minutes later. What investigators found as they dug through the rubble and the data was a series of small breakdowns that, when combined, created a lethal gap. The warning was there. The technology was there. The sirens were there. But the path from detection to action was not straight. It was a chain with weak links. The storm itself was not unusual for Nebraska in late April. The region is part of Tornado Alley, though the term is more of a cultural marker than a scientific one. Nebraska averages 57 tornadoes per year. Most are weak EF0 or EF1. EF4 tornadoes, like the one that struck Lincoln, are rare. The last EF4 in Nebraska was in 2019, near the town of Pilger, which killed 2 people. Before that, the 2013 Moore tornado in Oklahoma and EF5 had killed 24. The Lincoln tornado was the deadliest in Nebraska since 1992, when a tornado in Sutton killed 4 people. The building codes in Lincoln were not designed to withstand EF4 winds. Most homes in the affected neighborhoods were built to standards that assumed a maximum wind speed of 90 miles per hour. The tornado's winds were nearly double that. Even buildings with reinforced roofs and walls, like the nursing home that lost its roof, could not stand up to the forces involved. The only safe place during an EF4 tornado is a basement or an interior room on the lowest floor, away from windows. Many homes in Lincoln did not have basements. The city's soil conditions, high water table and clay, made basements expensive and sometimes impractical. In the Highland Park neighborhood, only about 30% of homes had basements. The rest had crawl spaces or slab foundations. The question of preparedness became a central issue in the weeks after the tornado. The Lincoln-Lancaster County Emergency Management Agency reviewed its protocols. The National Weather Service examined its warning procedures. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, sent teams to assess damage and provide assistance. But change, especially in hazard mitigation, moves slowly. Building codes are updated in cycles of several years. Funding for storm shelters is limited. Public education campaigns about tornado safety are conducted regularly, but compliance remains inconsistent. The human consequences of the Lincoln tornado were not limited to the 6 who died. Over 150 people were injured, some with permanent disabilities. Thousands were displaced. The economic impact rippled through the city. Businesses closed, jobs lost, tax revenue declined. The psychological toll was harder to measure. Post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, these became common in the months after. The university offered free counseling to students, staff, and faculty. The city opened a recovery center, but the process of healing, like the process of rebuilding, was slow. One of the unanswered questions that lingered was why the grocery store, a known gathering place in a densely populated area, did not have a designated storm shelter. The store was built in the 1980s, before modern tornado safety requirements for commercial buildings were adopted. The building code at the time did not require a shelter. After the tornado, city council members proposed a new ordinance requiring storm shelters in all new commercial buildings above a certain size. The proposal met resistance from developers who cited increased costs. The debate continued for months. Another question was about the mobile phone alert system. Why did some people receive the alert later than others? Why did the alert not contain specific guidance like go to the basement or the lowest interior room? The Federal Communications Commission, which oversees wireless emergency alerts, later opened an inquiry into the delays. The findings were inconclusive. The system was designed for speed, not precision. But speed without precision can create confusion. The story of the Lincoln tornado is not just a story of a storm. It is a story of systems, whether forecasting, emergency communication, building design, human behavior, and political will. It is a story of how a series of separate decisions made over decades converged on a single afternoon to determine who lived and who died. It is also a story of resilience. In the days after the tornado, neighbors helped neighbors dig through debris. Volunteers from across the state showed up to provide meals, medical care, and comfort. The recovery effort was massive, but it was also deeply local. As the investigation continued, one thing became clear: the tornado itself was not a surprise. It was predicted, tracked, and warned about, but prediction does not equal protection. Warning does not equal safety. And the gap between the two is where disasters happen. The Lincoln tornado was a natural event, but the deaths were not natural. They were the result of a system that worked well enough to know a tornado was coming, but not well enough to make sure everyone was safe when it arrived. What remained was the question of what would change. Would the sirens be upgraded? Would building codes be revised? Would mobile alerts become faster and more specific? Would more people take warnings seriously? These were not questions for meteorologists alone. They were questions for everyone. Because the next tornado, whether it comes in a year or a decade, will find the same gaps unless those gaps are closed. And the only way to close them is to look at what happened on April 26, 2024, and understand every failure, every delay, every moment that mattered. At 4:03 p.m. on April 26, 2024, the tornado crossed the intersection of 48th and O Street. The path was now moving directly through the heart of Lincoln's retail corridor. A strip mall anchored by a hardware store took a direct hit. The roof collapsed in sections. 2 people inside the hardware store survived by crouching in a back room filled with concrete bags. 3 others were not as fortunate. They had been standing at the front counter waiting for the storm to pass. The store had no basement. The manager later told investigators he had heard the siren but assumed it was a test. It was the first Saturday of spring. Tests usually happen on Saturdays. At 4:05 p.m., the tornado entered the Wuka Cemetery, a historic burial ground founded in 1869. It uprooted over 200 trees, toppled headstones, and scattered debris across graves. The cemetery superintendent later described the scene as a battlefield of broken granite. No one was injured there, but the damage to the landscape was severe. Some families later had to use GPS coordinates to find their loved ones' burial plots because the landmarks were gone. At 4:07 p.m., the tornado struck the Lincoln Fire Department Station 7. The station was built in 2005 with reinforced concrete walls. It held. The firefighters inside were already on a call in a different part of the city. The station's roof sustained damage, but the apparatus bay doors held. The station's emergency generator failed during the storm, but backup battery systems kept the communications equipment running. The firefighters returned to find a station without power and a neighborhood in ruins. At 4:10 p.m., the tornado reached the edge of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's East Campus. The university's agricultural research facility was hit. Greenhouses shattered. Livestock barns collapsed. Several horses and cattle were killed or had to be euthanized. The research data stored on computers in the facility was backed up off-site, but the physical samples, seeds, soil cores, and tissue cultures were destroyed. The university later estimated the loss of research materials at $3 million. The research itself would take years to recreate. At 4:12 p.m., the tornado exited the city limits and entered open farmland. It continued northeast, weakening as it moved. By 4:20 p.m., the National Weather Service downgraded its warning. The storm had passed. The damage assessment would take days. The death toll was initially reported as 3. That number would double by the end of the night. What the investigators found in the hours and days after the tornado was a pattern of systematic vulnerabilities that had been known for years. The National Weather Service had conducted a tornado safety survey in Lancaster County in 2019. The survey found that nearly 40% of residents did not have a reliable way to receive warnings while at home. Many relied on outdoor sirens, which were designed to be heard outdoors, not inside buildings. The survey also found that about 30% of residents did not know the difference between a tornado watch and a tornado warning. Public education campaigns had been run, but they were underfunded and infrequent. The city's emergency management coordinator, who had been in the position for 12 years, had repeatedly requested funding for a more robust warning system. The city council had debated the issue several times, but the requests were deferred or reduced. The sirens had been installed in the 1970s. They were designed for a population of 150,000. Lincoln's population by 2024 was over 290,000. The siren coverage area had not expanded accordingly. There were entire neighborhoods, especially newer developments on the outskirts, that could not hear the sirens at all. The city had maps showing these gaps. They had been presented to the council in 2020 and again in 2021. No funding was allocated. The mobile phone alert system also had known issues. The Wireless Emergency Alert System is a partnership between the federal government, wireless carriers, and emergency managers. The system is designed to deliver alerts to all compatible mobile devices within range of a cell tower. But the system has a latency problem. In a study published by the Department of Homeland Security in 2018, researchers found that the average time between an alert being issued and being received on a device was 90 seconds. In some cases, it could be up to 5 minutes. For a tornado warning, which typically has a lead time of 13 to 15 minutes, a delay of 2 minutes can be the difference between life and death. The question of why the grocery store did not have a designated shelter was not unique to that building. A survey of commercial buildings in Lincoln conducted after the tornado found that fewer than 10% of buildings constructed before 2000 had any form of storm shelter. Building codes did not require them. The International Building Code, which Lincoln used as its base, did not mandate tornado shelters except in certain high-occupancy structures like schools and hospitals. Commercial buildings were exempt. The grocery store was a commercial building. It was not required to have a shelter. The people inside were left to fend for themselves. The human factor was also examined in detail. The manager of the grocery store, who had worked there for 14 years, told investigators that he followed the company's severe weather protocol. The protocol was to monitor the weather radio and the local news. When a tornado warning was issued, the protocol said to direct customers to the interior of the store, away from windows and glass doors. But the protocol did not designate a specific shelter area. It did not account for the possibility that the entire building might be destroyed. The manager later said he thought the interior of the store, which had steel shelving and concrete floors, would be safe. He was wrong. The 2 graduate students who were trapped in the basement of the university library later recounted their experience. They said they had received the text alert at 3:53 p.m. but did not take it seriously because they had received false alarms in the past. One of them had been at the university during a tornado warning in 2022 that turned out to be a false alarm. He had walked across campus during that warning because he did not believe the threat was real. He survived that day. On April 26, 2024, he did not make the same mistake. He and his friend went to the basement, but they were the exception. Many others in the library did not move. The university's emergency management office later reported that only about 60% of students and staff who were in buildings that had basements actually used them. The other 40% stayed where they were, either because they did not receive the warning, did not believe it, or did not know where to go. The university had conducted tornado drills every semester, but the drills were often treated as a formality. Students described them as annoying and a waste of time. One student told a local newspaper that she had attended a drill in 2023 and had not learned anything new. She said she already knew to go to the lowest floor. But on April 26, 2024, she was on the 3rd floor of a building that had a basement. She did not go down. She was trapped in a stairwell for an hour after the tornado hit. She survived, but she suffered a broken leg and a concussion. The aftermath of the Lincoln tornado brought a wave of investigations, lawsuits, and policy debates. The families of the 6 victims filed wrongful death lawsuits against the city, the grocery store chain, and the mobile phone carriers. The lawsuits argued that the city had failed to maintain the warning system, that the grocery store had failed to provide a safe environment, and that the carriers had failed to deliver the warnings in time. The cases were consolidated and eventually settled out of court. The terms were not disclosed. The National Weather Service conducted its own internal review. The review found that the tornado warning was issued correctly and in a timely manner. The meteorologist who issued the warning had 14 years of experience and had followed standard procedures. The review also found that the lead time, 13 minutes, was above the national average. But the review noted that the warning could have been more specific. The wording used at 3:46 p.m. was, "A tornado warning is in effect for Lancaster County until 4:30 p.m. A confirmed tornado is on the ground near Emerald. It is moving northeast at 50 miles per hour. Take shelter now." The review suggested that adding language about specific landmarks could have helped people understand the urgency. But the meteorologist who issued the warning said that during a rapidly evolving situation, brevity was more important than detail. The review did not fault him. The Federal Communications Commission opened its own inquiry into the mobile alert delays. The inquiry found that one carrier, T-Mobile, had experienced a software glitch that delayed the alert by nearly 2 minutes. The glitch was traced to a server misconfiguration that had been introduced during a routine maintenance update 2 weeks before the tornado. T-Mobile corrected the glitch within 72 hours of the tornado. The FCC issued a fine of $300,000. T-Mobile paid the fine but did not admit fault. The City Council, after months of debate, passed an ordinance requiring all new commercial buildings larger than 50,000 square feet to include a storm shelter. The ordinance also required existing buildings of that size to retrofit a shelter within 10 years. The estimated cost of retrofitting a grocery store was between $200,000 and $500,000. The grocery store chain that had lost 6 people announced that it would retrofit all of its Nebraska locations within 2 years. The chain's CEO said in a press conference that no family should ever have to lose a loved one because of a building code loophole. The university implemented a new alert system that included a tone-based siren that could be heard inside all campus buildings. The system also included a mandatory training module for all incoming students and staff. The module was a 10-minute video that explained the difference between watches and warnings, where to go in each building, and what to do if caught outside. The university also installed weather radios in every classroom and lab. The cost of the new system was $2 million. The university's Board of Regents approved it unanimously. But the deeper question remained: why did the system fail and how could it be fixed? The Lincoln tornado was not an anomaly. It was a typical tornado in a typical Midwestern city. The vulnerabilities that were exposed on April 26, 2024, existed in hundreds of cities across the United States. The same gaps in warning systems, building codes, and public education were present in Omaha, Des Moines, Wichita, and Tulsa. The question was not whether another city would experience a similar disaster. The question was when. The National Weather Service had been advocating for years for a national standard for tornado shelters in commercial buildings. The American Meteorological Society had published several papers on the subject. The Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety had developed a model code. But the adoption of such codes was left to state and local governments. Many states, especially those in the heart of Tornado Alley, had resisted because of the cost. The Lincoln tornado changed the conversation. In the year after the tornado, Nebraska's state legislature passed a bill requiring all new public schools and hospitals to include tornado shelters. The bill did not cover commercial buildings. The fight over that provision was expected to continue in the next session. The human consequences of the Lincoln tornado extended far beyond the physical damage. The long-term psychological toll was documented in a study conducted by the University of Nebraska Medical Center. The study surveyed residents of the affected neighborhoods 6 months after the tornado. It found that nearly 40% of respondents reported symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. 20% reported new or worsening anxiety. 15% reported depression. The study also found that children were especially affected. Parents reported that their children had trouble sleeping, were afraid of storms, and would not go outside when the sky was cloudy. The university opened a free counseling clinic in the Highland Park neighborhood. It remained open for 2 years. One of the most enduring images of the Lincoln tornado was the photograph of a single stuffed animal, a teddy bear, sitting on top of a pile of rubble. The teddy bear belonged to a 4-year-old girl named Maya. Her family's house was destroyed. Maya survived because her mother had carried her into the basement just seconds before the tornado hit. The teddy bear was later found by a search and rescue team. They placed it on the rubble as a marker. Maya's mother returned to the site the next day and found the teddy bear. She told a reporter that the teddy bear was the only thing she had left from her daughter's room. She said it gave her hope. The story of Maya and her teddy bear became a symbol of the community's resilience. But resilience alone could not fix the systems that failed. The Lincoln tornado was a reminder that disaster preparedness is not just a matter of meteorology. It is a matter of policy, investment, and culture. The warnings were there, the technology was there, the knowledge was there. But the gap between knowing and doing was wide enough for a tornado to pass through. As the city rebuilt, the debate about what had happened continued. Some said the fault lay with the warning system. Some said it lay with the building codes. Some said it lay with human behavior. The truth was that all of these factors contributed. The system worked, but it did not work for everyone. And the people it did not work for were the ones who died. The investigation into the Lincoln tornado closed in early 2005. The final report from the National Weather Service was 700 pages long. It included recommendations for improving warning communication, expanding siren coverage, and strengthening building codes. The report also included a section on the importance of public education. It noted that in the end, the most effective warning is the one that is heard, understood, and acted upon. And that requires a system that is not just technically sound, but also deeply connected to the people it is meant to protect. The Lincoln tornado was not the end of the story. It was a chapter in an ongoing narrative about how we prepare for the unexpected. The next storm will come. The question is whether the same mistakes will be repeated. The year following the Lincoln tornado was marked by a series of investigations, policy debates, and personal reckonings. The National Weather Service final report was released in early 2025, but its recommendations would take years to implement. The report's executive summary was blunt. The warning system had performed near its technical limits, but the human response had fallen short. It cited 3 primary failures. First, the mobile alert delay of 2 minutes for T-Mobile subscribers. Second, the lack of audible warnings in large commercial buildings without public address systems. Third, the absence of a standardized location-specific message that could have prompted faster action. At 4:01 p.m. on April 26, 2024, the tornado had crossed Highway 77, moving directly toward the Highland Park neighborhood. At that moment, the Lancaster County Emergency Management Agency received a report from a spotter who had seen the funnel cloud touch down near the intersection of South 14th Street and Old Cheney Road. The report was relayed to the National Weather Service, which updated the warning to include language about a large and extremely dangerous tornado. But that update came at 4:03 p.m., only 2 minutes before the tornado struck the neighborhood. Many residents later said they received the updated alert on their phones as the tornado was passing overhead. The emergency response during the tornado was swift but chaotic. The Lincoln Fire Department had pre-positioned rescue crews at 3 staging areas south of the city. They were activated at 3:58 p.m. after the warning was issued. Those crews began moving north toward the predicted path, but by 4:05 p.m. when the tornado entered the city limits, the crews were still several blocks away. The first responders arrived at the grocery store at 4:12 p.m., 7 minutes after the tornado passed. They found a scene of devastation. 38 people were inside the store when the roof collapsed. 22 were rescued within the first hour. 6 died. How could 7 minutes change everything? The answer lies in the nature of tornado injuries. The most common cause of death in tornadoes is head trauma from flying debris. The people who survived were those who had covered their heads or who were in the building's interior storage area, which had a small concrete shelter. The people who died were in the main retail area where the roof fell directly onto them. The 7-minute gap between the tornado's passage and the rescue crew's arrival did not cause the deaths, but it meant that survivors who were trapped under debris had to wait longer for help. The official after-action review of the Lincoln Fire Department noted that the staging areas were chosen based on the predicted path of the storm, but the tornado had deviated slightly east. The deviation was only about half a mile, but that half mile put the crews in the wrong position. The review recommended that future staging areas be placed in a ring around the city rather than at specific points to allow for more flexible response. The recommendation was adopted in July 2005. The search and rescue effort continued for 3 days. The last survivor was pulled from the rubble of a collapsed apartment building at 2:47 a.m. on April 28. She was a 23-year-old graduate student named Priya who had taken shelter in her bathtub. The building had been a 2-story wood frame structure built in 1962, before modern building codes required tie-downs for roof trusses. The tornado had lifted the roof, then collapsed the walls inward. Priya's bathtub was the only space that remained intact. She suffered a broken leg and a concussion, but she survived. The recovery of the deceased took longer. The last body was found on May 3rd under a pile of debris from a strip mall. The victim was a 67-year-old retired teacher named Harold who had been walking home from a bus stop. He had tried to shelter in the strip mall's entrance, but the glass doors shattered and he was struck by a piece of the roof. Harold's death was later classified as preventable in the coroner's report, which noted that a nearby bank had a basement shelter, but Harold did not know it was accessible to the public. The question of public access to shelters became a central issue in the months that followed. Lincoln had a list of designated public shelters, but many were churches or schools that were not marked. City Council passed an ordinance requiring all public shelters to be clearly signed, with a standard blue and white tornado shelter logo similar to the ones used for highway rest areas. The ordinance was passed in November 2024, but the signs were not installed until March 2005. By then, the tornado season had already begun again. The psychological impact of the tornado was measured in a longitudinal study conducted by the University of Nebraska Medical Center. The study enrolled 2,000 residents from the affected zip codes and followed them for 2 years. The first-year results, published in July 2025, showed that 42% of respondents screened positive for probable PTSD. The number was highest among people who had lost their homes. In that subgroup, 67% met the criteria for PTSD. The study also found a correlation between the time it took to receive a warning and the severity of symptoms. People who received the warning less than 5 minutes before the tornado hit had significantly higher rates of anxiety and hypervigilance. One participant in the study, a 40-year-old mother of 3 named Janelle, told researchers that she still could not sleep through a thunderstorm. She had received the mobile alert at 3:57 p.m., exactly 3 minutes before the tornado struck her house. She had just enough time to grab her youngest child and run to the hallway. The roof of her living room was torn off. Her 2 older children were in the basement, but they had not heard the siren because their music was too loud. Janelle said that every time she heard a loud noise, she felt her heart race. She avoided driving past the grocery store that had been destroyed. She had nightmares about the sound of the roof coming off. The university's counseling clinic in Highland Park served more than 3,000 patients in its first year. The clinic employed 12 therapists, all of whom specialized in disaster trauma. The clinic's director, Dr. Maria Alvarez, said that the most common symptom in children was regressive behavior. A 5-year-old boy who had been potty trained for 2 years started wetting the bed again. A 9-year-old girl refused to go to school because she was afraid the tornado might come while she was in class. Dr. Alvarez said that the children's fears were not irrational. They had experienced a real threat, and their brains were trying to protect them from it. The clinic also treated first responders. The Lincoln Fire Department reported that 8 of its firefighters had been diagnosed with PTSD within 6 months of the tornado. One firefighter, Jake, who had been part of the search and rescue team at the grocery store, told a reporter that he could not eat ham sandwiches anymore. The smell reminded him of the deli counter, which had been scattered across the parking lot. Jake took a leave of absence. He returned to work in March 2025, but he transferred to a station in a rural area where the calls were less intense. The economic impact of the tornado was estimated at $1.2 billion in insured losses. The Federal Emergency Management Agency approved $160 million in individual assistance, and the Small Business Administration approved $72 million in low-interest loans. But the process of getting aid was slow. Many homeowners said they waited months for their claims to be processed. An investigation by the Lincoln Journal-Star found that the average wait time for a FEMA inspection was 18 days. The average time from inspection to payment was another 35 days. That meant that some families were living in hotels or with relatives for more than 2 months. The rebuilding of Highland Park began in earnest in the summer of 2004. The neighborhood had been a mix of single-family homes, duplexes, and small apartment buildings, many built between 1920 and 1960. The city created a tax increment financing district to help fund redevelopment. The district offered property tax abatements for new construction that included storm shelters. By the end of 2025, 50 new homes had been built, each with a residential storm shelter. But the shelters were expensive. A typical basement shelter cost between $4,000 and $8,000. A standalone above-ground shelter could cost $10,000 or more. The city offered a rebate of $1,000 for shelters installed before 2025, but only 62 homeowners applied. The debate over building codes continued at the state level. The bill that required tornado shelters in new public schools and hospitals passed the Nebraska legislature by a vote of 38-11 in April 2005. But the same bill failed to include commercial buildings. The commercial real estate lobby argued that the cost of retrofitting all existing grocery stores, strip malls, and big-box retailers would be prohibitive. They pointed to a study by the University of Nebraska that estimated the total cost at $2.4 billion statewide. The lobby also argued that tornado deaths in commercial buildings were rare. The Lincoln tornado killed 6 people in one grocery store, but in the previous 10 years, only 3 people had died in tornadoes inside commercial buildings in Nebraska. The advocates for stronger codes said that the rarity was exactly the problem. They argued that it was not a matter of cost, but of value. A human life, they said, was worth more than the price of a shelter. The debate was emotional and it was personal. The families of the 6 people killed in the grocery store formed a nonprofit called the Lincoln Six, which lobbied for stricter codes. The nonprofit raised $100,000 in its first year, largely from small donations. They hired a lobbyist, but the legislative session ended without a commercial building shelter requirement. The story of the Lincoln tornado did not end with the legislative session. It continued in classrooms, living rooms, and town hall meetings across the city. The university's public safety department launched a campaign called Know Your Zone, which used maps to show every building in Lincoln that had a designated shelter. The campaign was built around a website and a smartphone app. By the spring of 2025, more than 40,000 people had downloaded the app, but the app only worked if people used it. The campaign also included a series of public service announcements, aired on local television stations, that reminded residents to check the app before a storm. One of the most poignant moments of the recovery came on the 1-year anniversary of the tornado. A memorial ceremony was held at the site of the grocery store where a small park had been built. The park featured a stone monument with the names of the 6 people who died. Their families attended the ceremony. The mayor gave a speech. The local high school choir sang Amazing Grace. Then a thunderstorm rolled in. The crowd looked up at the dark clouds and many people began to move toward the exits. The ceremony ended early. It was a reminder that the trauma was still raw. The Lincoln tornado in the end was not an anomaly. It was a case study in the gap between technology and behavior. The warning systems were advanced, the meteorologists were skilled, the emergency managers were prepared, but the people in the path of the tornado were not just data points. They were individuals with different backgrounds, different fears, and different thresholds for taking action. Some heard the siren and did not move. Some saw the mobile alert and dismissed it. Some were in buildings that had no shelter. The tornado did not discriminate. It followed the path of least resistance. The question that lingered after all the investigations were closed was not whether the system could be improved, but whether the improvements would be implemented before the next disaster. The answer in Lincoln was mixed. The sirens were louder. The mobile alerts were faster. The building codes were stricter for some buildings but not for others. The public education campaign was more visible. But the fundamental challenge remained: how to make people believe that a warning is real when the sky is still blue. The next storm will come. The question is whether the same mistakes will be repeated. But perhaps the more honest question is, what are the mistakes that we have not yet identified? Every tornado exposes a new vulnerability. The Lincoln tornado exposed the vulnerability of large commercial buildings, the vulnerability of mobile alert networks, and the vulnerability of human psychology. The next tornado will expose something else. The work of preparedness is never finished. It is a continuous process of learning, adapting, and remembering. And the best way to honor the memory of those who died is to keep asking the hard questions, even when the answers are inconvenient. The storm that produced the Lincoln tornado began as a cluster of thunderstorms over western Nebraska at around 2 in the afternoon on the 26th of April, 2024. The Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma, had issued a moderate risk of severe thunderstorms for eastern Nebraska that morning, noting that the atmosphere would be highly unstable with strong wind shear. The key ingredients were there: a dry line pushing east from the high plains, a low-pressure system over South Dakota, and abundant moisture flowing north from the Gulf of Mexico. The forecast was not a surprise. The meteorologist at the National Weather Service office in Hastings, Nebraska, had been watching the data since sunrise. At 3:45 p.m., a severe thunderstorm warning was issued for Lancaster County. The storm was moving at 50 miles per hour, a speed that would make quick decisions essential. At 4:02 p.m., the NWS detected rotation in the storm's updraft. A tornado warning was issued at 4:07 p.m., 23 minutes before the tornado touched down. That lead time was above the national average of about 14 minutes. The warning was polygon-shaped, covering a small area that included Highland Park and the grocery store. The text of the warning used strong language. "This is a particularly dangerous situation. Take shelter immediately." At 4:18 p.m., the tornado was reported on the ground at the southwest edge of Lincoln. The first call to 911 came at 4:19 p.m. The emergency dispatch recorded a caller saying he could see a funnel cloud with debris. The tornado was moving northeast at 45 miles per hour. At 4:22 p.m., it crossed Interstate 80. Several vehicles were tossed. 2 semi-trailers were overturned. The drivers survived, later saying they had pulled over and crouched in the median ditch. At 4:23 p.m., the tornado entered Highland Park. The grocery store was struck at 4:24 p.m. The meteorological timeline was precise. The videos from storm chasers and security cameras were later analyzed frame by frame. The tornado was rated EF3 with winds estimated at 155 miles per hour. It was on the ground for a total of 14 minutes, covering a path of 11 miles. The width of the damaged swath averaged 300 yards but widened to 500 yards at the grocery store. At 4:29 p.m., the tornado lifted just north of the Lincoln city limits. The sun came out. The sirens continued for another 5 minutes. The storm raged for only a few hundred seconds, but the analysis of its behavior took months. The meteorologists at the NWS Hastings office reconstructed the storm using radar data from multiple sites. They found that the tornado formed from a mesocyclone that had been rotating for nearly half an hour before touchdown. The radar signature showed a classic hook echo, the kind of pattern that tells a trained eye that a tornado is likely. The NWS had seen the hook echo at 4:06 p.m., 1 minute before the warning was issued. But the hook echo was not the only signal. The dual polarization radar also showed a debris ball at 4:20 p.m., 3 minutes after the tornado was on the ground. A debris ball appears when the radar beam bounces off not just raindrops or hail, but also shingles, insulation, tree branches, and pieces of homes. It is a sure sign that a tornado is causing damage. The NWS transmitted that information to the Emergency Management Office. The office issued a second emergency alert for the area around the grocery store at 4:22 p.m. The alert went out over the wireless emergency alert system. But by then, the grocery store had less than 2 minutes of lead time. The question that followed was whether those 2 minutes could have made a difference. The answer from the simulation studies conducted at the University of Nebraska was that they could have. The study showed that if the store's employees had received the alert at 4:22 p.m., they would have had time to move customers to the store's designated shelter area, the freezer section in the back. But the store did not have a shelter area. The freezer section was not designed to withstand an EF3 tornado. The simulation assumed that any protected space would be better than the open retail floor. In the actual event, 11 people who survived the collapse inside the store said they had no warning at all. They heard the siren only seconds before the roof came down. The NWS has a policy of verifying the accuracy of its warnings after every severe weather event. For the Lincoln tornado, the probability of detection was 100%. The tornado warning was issued and verified. The lead time was above average. The false alarm ratio, which measures how often a warning is issued but no tornado occurs, was 0 for that day. By standard metrics, the warning system worked. But the system is only as good as its last failure. In this case, the system failed not in the issuance of the warning, but in its reception and interpretation. Research published after the tornado from the National Severe Storms Laboratory examined the behavior of people in the path of the storm. The research used data from mobile phone location services to track movement. They found that in the 20 minutes before the tornado, only 31% of people in the warning polygon moved to a basement or shelter. The rest either stayed where they were or moved to another room on the same floor. A quarter of the people did not change location at all. The survey conducted later showed that many people did not believe the tornado would hit them. They thought it would turn or pass by. They had become desensitized to warnings after decades of alerts that did not lead to damage. This is a pattern that has been documented many times. People in tornado-prone regions like the Great Plains and the Southeast often hear the siren 2 or 3 times in a single storm season. Most of those warnings do not result in a confirmed tornado. The boy who cried wolf is a cliché because it is true. The problem is not that the warnings are inaccurate. The problem is that they are too frequent, and the cost of taking shelter every time is high for the individual. The cost includes lost work, disrupted plans, and the psychological drain of constant vigilance. The decision to ignore a warning is not always irrational. It is a calculation based on lived experience. The Lincoln tornado forced a new conversation about that calculation. Several studies published in 2025 examined the concept of warning fatigue in Nebraska. One study by the University of Nebraska Medical Center found that residents who had been in a prior tornado warning that did not produce damage were twice as likely to ignore the next warning. The effect was cumulative. After 5 false alarms, the likelihood of ignoring a warning rose to 60%. The Lincoln tornado had been preceded by 2 weeks of storms that generated warnings but no tornadoes in the area. Residents had heard the siren on the 14th, the 19th, and the 21st. On the 26th, many assumed it was the same. The NWS has attempted to address warning fatigue by using more specific language. The particularly dangerous situation wording is reserved for the most serious events, but the phrase is not universally understood. A survey conducted after the tornado found that only 18% of respondents knew what particularly dangerous situation meant. The rest saw it as more of the same. The NWS also uses the impact-based warning format, which includes hazard icons and damage levels. The Lincoln tornado warning was an IBW with the highest level of damage potential, but the IBW format has only been fully implemented since 2019. It is still not widely recognized by the public. Another layer of the problem is the difference between mobile alerts and outdoor sirens. The wireless emergency alert system sends a tone to every phone in the polygon. But the tone is short and the message is brief. At 4:22 p.m., the alert for the Lincoln tornado read, "Severe weather alert, take shelter now, this is a life-threatening situation." The message did not include the word tornado because the system limits characters. Some residents said they received the alert but thought it was a test. Others said they were driving and could not read the screen. The system also has a latency of several seconds. In a storm moving at 50 miles per hour, those seconds matter. The sirens in Lincoln were upgraded in 2010. The new system uses a network of electronic sirens that can broadcast voice messages, but the voice messages are only activated for the most severe events. For the April 26 tornado, the sirens played a recorded voice saying tornado warning, take shelter immediately, but the voice was not synchronized. Some sirens were 3 seconds behind others. The sound was confusing. In the grocery store, the employees said they heard the siren but could not understand what it was saying. The voice echoed off the building's walls. After the tornado, the city invested in 20 additional sirens for the Highland Park area. But the total number of sirens in Lincoln is now 112, covering a city of over 290,000 people. The coverage is not uniform. Those who rely on sirens alone are at a disadvantage, especially those who live in the deeper parts of the city where the sound does not carry. The decision to add sirens was based on a study that showed that many residents still depend on the outdoor warning system. The study found that 69% of Lincoln residents do not have a weather radio, 34% do not have a smartphone with cellular data. The digital divide is not just about internet access. It is about access to warnings. The human factors are complex, but the meteorological factors are also evolving. Tornadoes in the United States are becoming more frequent in certain regions, including the Midwest. Research published in the Journal of Climate in 2024 showed that the number of days with tornadoes across the Great Plains has increased by 12% over the past 2 decades. The tornadoes are also clustering more tightly. The Lincoln tornado occurred during a period of high activity. The 2024 tornado season was the second most active on record, with more than 1,400 tornadoes reported across the country. The season included outbreaks in the Midwest, the Southeast, and the Ohio Valley. The link between tornadoes and climate change is still being studied. The warmer atmosphere holds more moisture, which fuels thunderstorm intensity. The jet stream patterns are shifting. The change is not uniform. Some regions may see fewer tornadoes, but the tornadoes that do form may be stronger. The evidence for an increase in intensity is still inconclusive, but the Lincoln tornado was not an outlier in terms of strength. EF3 tornadoes occur about 100 times a year in the United States. The damage they cause is also changing. The modern built environment is more vulnerable because of sprawl and the lack of interior safe rooms. The commercial building code debate after Lincoln highlighted a long-standing blind spot in American construction. Most residential building codes in tornado-prone areas have been updated to require stronger connections between roof and walls and foundation. The International Residential Code includes provisions for high-wind regions, but commercial buildings built before the 2000s often lack interior load-bearing walls that can act as shelters. The grocery store in Lincoln was built in 1998. Its roof was a lightweight steel truss system, typical of big-box retail. The walls were concrete tilt-up panels, but the roof was not attached to the walls with enough strength to resist the uplift of an EF3 tornado. The investigation found that the roof separated from the walls almost immediately, causing the entire structure to collapse. The Lincoln Six, the nonprofit formed by the families of the victims, advocated for a pilot program that would require all new commercial buildings over 10,000 square feet to include a designated storm shelter. The proposal was submitted to the Lincoln City Council in October 2024. The council held 3 public hearings. The commercial real estate lobby testified that the requirement would increase construction costs by an average of 12%. The cost of the shelter itself was only a small part of that. The greater expense came from the redesign of the building layout, the reinforcement of the walls around the shelter, and the installation of a backup generator. The council voted down the proposal 6-1. The alternative approach was to incentivize shelters rather than mandate them. In November 2024, Lancaster County launched a grant program that paid 50% of the cost of installing a storm shelter in any commercial building built before 2000. The grant program had a budget of $2 million, funded by the county's general fund. Applications opened in January 2025. By December 2025, only 22 grants had been awarded. The program administrator said that many commercial building owners were not interested because the shelter would take up floor space that could be used for retail or storage. A grocery store owner told a reporter that he would rather install a safe room for his employees than for customers because employees were harder to replace. The ethical dimension of the decision to build or not to build is rarely discussed in plain terms. Buildings are not just structures, they are expressions of priorities. The grocery store in Lincoln had a manager who had asked the corporate office in 2019 to install a storm shelter. The corporate office said no, citing cost. That cost was estimated at $40,000 for a shelter that could hold 100 people. The manager did not press the issue. He later said he wished he had. The 6 people who died included a grandmother, 2 mothers with their children, and a retiree. Their names are on the memorial at the park. The stone is granite. It cost $12,000. It was paid for by donations from the community. The debate over building codes and warning systems is rooted in a deeper reluctance to accept that disasters are predictable. The path of the Lincoln tornado was not random. The neighborhood of Highland Park had been developed in the 1920s on a narrow strip of land that followed a drainage basin. The basin acted as a natural channel for the wind. Tornadoes follow the terrain. They are drawn to hills and valleys. The NWS Storm Survey found that the tornado's path was almost exactly aligned with the Lincoln Creek drainage. The city's 2010 Hazard Mitigation Plan had identified the area as being at high risk for tornado damage. But the plan was not a binding document. It was a suggestion. The question of responsibility is uncomfortable. It forces the acknowledgement that not everyone is equally protected. The Lincoln tornado killed 6 people in the grocery store. It also killed a woman in a mobile home park a mile away. The man who lived next to her survived because he dug a trench and buried a shipping container. He had built the shelter himself. It cost him $2,000. He said he did it because he had lost a friend in the 2013 Moore tornado. The woman who died did not have a shelter. She had moved to Lincoln a year before from California. She did not know that mobile homes are the most dangerous place to be in a tornado. She did not know that she needed a plan. The education gap is not just about knowledge. It is about access to knowledge. The public education campaigns after the tornado focused on the Know Your Zone app and the voice sirens, but the campaigns were in English. Lincoln has a growing refugee community, including families from Myanmar, Sudan, and Iraq. The tornado warning on April 26 was broadcast in English and Spanish. It was not translated into Karen, Arabic, or Somali. The aftermath included a lawsuit filed by a refugee family whose child was injured when their apartment building collapsed. The lawsuit claimed that the city failed to provide warnings in languages understood by the family. The case was settled out of court in September 2025. The terms were not disclosed. The story of the Lincoln tornado is not a story of failure alone. It is a story of learning. The NWS has since updated its mobile alert system to allow longer messages. The city has installed multilingual sirens in 2 neighborhoods with high refugee populations. The state legislature passed a new law requiring that all severe weather warnings issued by emergency management be translated into the 5 most common non-English languages in the state. The list includes Spanish, Vietnamese, Arabic, Karen, and Somali. That law took effect in January 2026, but the law does not address the core question of why people ignore warnings. The research continues. A team at the University of Nebraska has developed a simulation training program for storm spotters that includes psychological scenarios. The program teaches spotters how to recognize and respond to the normalcy bias of the public. The normalcy bias is the tendency to assume that things will continue as they are, even when the evidence suggests otherwise. It is the reason that people do not evacuate before a hurricane and do not shelter before a tornado. It is a survival mechanism that works most of the time, but when it fails, the consequences are fatal. The training program is now used by the Lancaster County Emergency Management Agency. The simulators cost $100,000. They were paid for by a grant from the Department of Homeland Security. The first class of 30 spotters completed the training in October 2025. The spotters are now deployed across the county. They carry radios that connect directly to the NWS. When a spotter sees a funnel cloud, they can report it in real time. The system is faster than radar. It saved lives during a tornado that struck a rural part of the county in June 2025. That tornado was weaker in EF1. No one was killed. The spotter's report gave the NWS enough lead time to issue a warning 11 minutes before the tornado touched down. The lessons of Lincoln are not only for Nebraska. They are for any community that lies in Tornado Alley or in Dixie Alley or in the expanding Tornado Valley across the Midwest. The same pattern repeats. The same debates are held. The same gaps are exposed. But the Lincoln tornado also showed that change is possible. The shelters in new homes, the translated warnings, the simulators for spotters, the app with real-time maps. These are all improvements. They are the result of persistence by families, advocates, and officials who refuse to accept that the deaths were inevitable. And yet the number of people who die in tornadoes has not declined over the past decade. It has stayed roughly the same, about 60 to 80 per year on average. The warning lead time has improved, the technology has improved, but the population has grown and more people live in manufactured homes and in the vulnerable edges of cities. The death toll is a product of many factors. The Lincoln tornado added 6 more names to the tally. The memorial at the park lists them. The wind blows through the trees. The grass grows over the ground. The final question is the hardest one. What would it take to make sure that a story like this does not happen again? The answer is that it will happen again. The only question is when. The research will continue. The codes will be debated. The warnings will be sent, and some people will survive and some will not. That is the nature of tornadoes. But the work of preparedness is not defeated by the fact that it is incomplete. The work matters. The 6 people who died mattered. Their names matter. The children who learn to wet the bed again will heal. The firefighter who could not eat ham sandwiches returned to work. The city rebuilt. The stories continue. The Lincoln tornado is a chapter in a book that is still being written. The next chapter will be written by someone else somewhere else when the sky turns green and the sirens sound. The hope is that they will be better prepared. The fear is that they will not. The only certainty is that the effort will be made, and that is enough.